Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're here this week to do another fall Whiparound, but also going to do a recap, I guess, of the SEC announcing permanent opponents for the once the SEC expands at Texas and Oklahoma. So 2025 and beyond, the permanent opponents, there was a lot of conjecture about what that would be. I know we wrote, or Mark wrote, something kind of predicting what those pairings would be, and we definitely talked about it on the podcast. So now that we have those, we do want to kind of dive a little bit into those and talk about what stands out to us. My big takeaway, quickly, spoiler alert for later in the discussion, my big takeaway is that really no one wins, because no matter what your pairings are, like, life is just ridiculously hard in the SEC, and there's really no such thing as a smooth path. So we will get into all of that here in a second. But first, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover, and every episode of Highway to Hoover, is brought to you by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level, all the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. Mark, in lieu of our usual football segment, I've got a little story time for you.
Okay.
So I was in Florida last week, primarily to see UF, but also, saw USF, saw Jacksonville U. Those were good. I've never been to either of those. Well, I've been to USF once before, but never been to JU. So that's kind of cool to get to some different places and talk to some different people and all that jazz, but mostly to see the Gators. But so I'm in Gainesville, and this has never happened to me. I've heard of this happening to other people. The fire alarm goes off in the hotel in the middle of the night.
Oh boy.
And it's just, of course, it's just blaring, right? As it should, right? I mean, it's the point. But so I get out of bed, and at first you're like kind of in a daze, right? Because you're just like, what is happening? And then when you realize what's happening, you're like, oh, good God. And like, I didn't smell smoke. I didn't see flames. So I got up.
You weren't worried, right?
Relatively leisurely, right? So I throw on basketball shorts and a t-shirt, put on my shoes, untied, walk outside. Thankfully, we were only out there like 15, 20 minutes or so. Could have been a heck of a lot worse. So after that, we go back inside, and then side note from that, there was a lady out there. First of all, she's ironically smoking a cigarette, but she was out in the parking lot, and the firefighters are like walking past us or whatever. And the lady asked, it was like it was like you'd see in like one of those television shows that follows firefighters, like Chicago Fire or whatever on NBC. Like, this was like a scene out of a movie where like the firefighters are walking by, and this woman in like a robe and smoking a cigarette is like, what's happening? What's going on? And the firefighters are like, where the fire alarm went off. And the lady was like, are we safe? And he's like, you're outside, aren't you? And that was the end of that interaction. Which is weird.
He had no patience for her.
No, really didn't. And of course the rest of us we kind of rolled our eyes, because silly questions, but I guess I get it. But so anyway, that we go back inside. I got back to sleep just fine. It was fine. Next morning I go down for breakfast, and so apparently whatever happened here triggered some of the sprinklers in various areas of the hotel. And so I get out of the elevator, and there's all these like industrial dryers running, like these big old loud fans that are just blowing everywhere. And I look to my right, and where their like gym is, their workout room is like completely cleared out. So maybe whatever happened originated there. And so it's, just blowing and loud, and there's a lot going on down there. And now imagine, so that's already a lot, right? You get up in the middle of the night, you come downstairs, there's noise and all this stuff going on. Now imagine you're chaperoning a high school field trip. Because there were, and I knew this, but I didn't see them outside. So like, I kind of forgotten about it. There were at least 2 big high school groups there at this hotel. I don't know if they were doing like a college visit thing to UF or what it was, but so there's a couple of big groups. And so I'm riding this elevator down with this woman, and we don't say anything, but we get out of the elevator together into the noise, the cacophony of the dryers and the kids and all that stuff. and it's a really crowded breakfast area. So like I get my food, I go back up to the room to eat it. And she happens to be riding back up with me. And so I'm like, man, there's a lot going on down there. Cause it was just loud and stuff. And she goes, yeah. And, chaperoning this high school trip has really been an experience. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And she's like, yeah, she's like, this to me is one of the 7 circles of hell. And she's like, I'll know I'm in hell if I die. And this is what I'm doing in my afterlife. I just thought, man, I cannot imagine. It was already bad enough that we had to traipse outside in our, in whatever we could grab to put on in the middle of the night. Mm-hmm. I can't imagine having to do it while also corralling dozens of high school kids. Like that's hard enough as it is, like chaperoning a high school trip. But anyway, the rest of my time in Florida was much more enjoyable.
So the fire you think might have started in the gym? It wasn't after your workout. Were those weights just burning up?
Oh man, I was just like, I was crushing it so hard that like just the combination of the heat coming off my biceps and the me throwing the weights down, the friction. Yeah, I'm sure that's what it was.
It happens.
I'm not gonna cop to that though because I don't want to be liable for anything. But
it's our secret. So shout out. No one's listening.
That's right. Yeah, nobody's just amongst friends.
It's just us.
Let's get to business, I guess. Mark, let's talk permanent opponents in the SEC 2025 and beyond. You wrote the piece. If you haven't read it yet, I recommend you do so. Go to SECX to read Mark's piece on diving into the SEC permanent opponents. He does a breakdown of what each team has and then kind of summarizes what we got here. So Mark, give us like a Cliff Notes version of that piece and then kind of your takeaways you want to share with folks here.
Yeah. So basically you're going through and what the piece does is it goes through and it lists who they play, but then who they might have played, right? Who were the other teams that be considered? Who were the, how does it work? Where were the good fits? Where were the not so good fits that just, hey, everyone's getting 2 and you're just, we're going to pair you 2 up. You're the 2 last kids at the dance and we're going to make sure you've got a partner, right? So there's some of that. And I do think that one of the things to keep in mind is these are just 2 of the opponents. They're still going to play 10 series. You're still going to have 8 other ones, right? So if you have 2 really hard ones or 2 really easy ones, don't stress out yet. It's because it's, the other 8 are going to rotate. So I think that, for me, some of the things that, I went in and looked at the last, the last 10-year average of conference records, RPIs, and obviously for Texas and Oklahoma, that's Big 12 numbers, to just kind of see, based on a 10-year average, realizing that, a lot of teams have improved a lot or maybe not so much in the last 10 years to see where that stands. So it's kind of interesting. Based on that, Auburn's was probably a little bit easier getting Alabama and Georgia, and Mississippi State drawing LSU and Ole Miss, not so easy, right? I do think one of the things that was interesting to me is that Texas was wildly inconsistent in the last 10 years. They had some great years, but they had some really bad years, and because of that, their numbers did not look so daunting, or at least as much as I expected. To see those. Obviously, really, really good program with a lot of advantages. Should be well prepared to play in the SEC. So their numbers here weren't as good, right? So, but Texas, just like for football, drawing Oklahoma and A&M was kind of a no-brainer. They're one of those teams you kind of wish you had the Big Ten football model where you can have more. Permanent opponents, and then some teams have less because of, Texas and Arkansas is a natural, right? And who wouldn't want to see Texas LSU? I mean, those kinds of things would be a lot of fun. So that's kind of, the high level for me. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on the pairings and how you feel the SEC did and just general, general observations.
I mean, first off, I think they did a pretty good job, right? Understanding that you're never going to get this air quotes 100% right? There's always going to be somebody who thinks that it should have been this or that, but I don't think there were any egregious ones where it's just like, oh, that's a total miss. Like, yes, there are series that we would have liked to have seen that we won't see as often. You've talked about some of those. I agree generally, but there wasn't anything sort of glaring, I don't think. And so that's good. And it's important to remember too, like, these are called permanent opponents, but things can change, right? I mean, and I think we can also see a future where the SEC is bigger than 16 teams, right? That's not going to happen anytime. Yeah. Well, I shouldn't say that because like tomorrow we could get, like huge conference realignment news, but
it's not as imminent. That change, but also, I mean, you're playing 10 series. That's not necessarily, you don't have to just play 10, right? You could play 8, you could play 12, you could play, or you could change 3-game sets and have other arrangements. I mean, it's not to say that this is the way it is forever. Okay.
Yeah. And one of the other things you mentioned there is like, yes, these are the 2 permanent opponents, but you will continue to play 10 series. So you're going to have 8 others rotating. And I think the positive there is that everyone will come around a lot faster, at least in theory. Right. So there were times where you could go, and this happens even more in football, I think, just because it's 8 as opposed to 10, games versus series, of course. But, you could go a while without seeing somebody, and you could certainly go a while without going to their place or vice versa. Right. So everything should come around a little bit quicker that way. I think the series that I think if you made me pick one, the series that was annual that will no longer be, that I think I'm going to miss the most, is probably going to be Tennessee and Florida. Right. When you think about the trajectory of those 2 programs, just because, Florida has kind of kicked it back into high gear after a few years that were a little less than UF standard, right? Last year, they get right to the cusp of another national title. Looks like their club, we'll talk about this in a minute, looks like their club is going to be right back in that mix again in 2024. And then, of course, Tennessee has just been on this rocket ship ride really since 2019,
just a totally
certainly since
program
2021.
Yeah.
Right, 100%. And so, I wrote that in my fall report for Tennessee that, they sold out a stadium for a fall game. And it wasn't that long ago that, getting 4,000 people into Lindsey Nelson Stadium was a task, much less, a fall game at a neutral site. So, I think that's the one I'll miss the most if you made me pick one here. I agree with you. Texas, the most kind of seems like the most obvious one, right? I mean, they have 2 big rivals, historical rivals in the conference as they come in. Texas and Oklahoma, boom, boom, done. I have to imagine that was the easiest one on the board for the SEC. And you're also right about the Texas thing, by the way, just as an aside, and they're a future SEC club. So I feel like we have the runway to talk about them a little more, but they've been to Omaha in 3 of the last 5 tournaments, right? 1, 2, 3. Yeah. 3 of the last 5 tournaments they've been to Omaha, and it doesn't feel like it, right? I mean, and I don't really know why. I think maybe some of it is because they haven't been to what I would call the business end of any of those trips to the College World Series. It's been a decent number of like relatively early exits. In 21, they got a little further. I think they pushed State, I think they were on State's bracket regardless. But for the most part, they haven't done that much in Omaha the last few times. And so, and then to your point, they also mix in a year where they finished last in the Big 12 in 2019.
Right.
It is a weird little trajectory they've been on, but yeah, so I'm with you in that. Sometimes I forget how up and down they've been as a program, because their ups are way up and their downs are pretty down.
It's a roller coaster.
They also, the latter Augie years also had a decent amount of, peak and valley. So interesting stuff there. So if you haven't read Mark's piece on the permanent opponents, like I said, do so. Just a lot of good insight there. And also it does a really good job, including the graphic at the top of the page, which Mark did not create, full disclosure. Sorry to blow up your spot there, Mark, but you did not create that graphic. But it is a really handy way to look at it. So that is available there as well. Make sure you check that out. Right. Let's talk about some fall stuff, Mark. This is our 4th fall whip around, probably our final fall whip around, given that everybody's more or less wrapping up fall as we speak. And we've talked, by the time we're done with this episode, we will have talked at length about everybody in the conference, between the teams you saw, the teams that I saw, and us getting some notes along the way from teams that Aaron saw. And we'll have some more of that today. Let's start with Florida, because we've both seen them in recent weeks. I saw them last week. Just to kind of real cliff notesy here, Mark, just kind of give the listeners and me, so that we don't double up too much. You talked about Florida this week. What were kind of your just handful of real quick top line takeaways from your time seeing Florida and Jacksonville for listeners who maybe didn't listen last week?
Yeah, I really liked what I saw on the mound. I think that they're going. I mean, they have 4 weekend starters. I mean, 4. Obviously, you have to figure that out. Who's going to be the 3 that go on conference weekends, and what happens to the 4th guy? Does Brandon Neely return to the bullpen? Right? Is that the way it works? And then offensively, obviously, Kaggs looked really impressive when I saw him. He's still very aggressive, but he was more selective. If those two can coexist, it looked that way. And obviously the power is real. So that to me is, if he is taking that next step, how do you pitch to that guy? Probably the biggest takeaway I had just from a surprise standpoint was I did not recognize Colby Shelton. He just looks like a totally different guy. He's leaner, and he's going to play shortstop. And I think, he's going to make the plays he gets to, and he's certainly improved his range as his body is improved. So we're going to see. I don't know that he's a professional shortstop. It's not really my call, but I think he can play it in the SEC. And I wouldn't have said that, heading into the season.
Yeah, that was interesting. So I knew that going in, that he was going to look a little bit different physically, but still, the first time I saw him step to the plate, it was a little bit jarring. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, because he's slimmer, he looks shorter, which is kind of, not that it matters, like the dude rakes, but it just, the smaller frame made him look a little shorter too. But yeah, definitely, and I think, to your point, I think he's going to be a fine college shortstop. I think sometimes if you have an Ozzie Smith equivalent at shortstop, Kentucky's going to run Grant Smith out there, and he's excellent. He made 3 errors last year. He makes every play look routine. He makes the occasional exceptional play, almost never makes a boneheaded error. If you've got that, great. But if you don't have that, do you just have a guy who can make all the routine plays, and, oh, by the way, he can really hit? Then you're probably fine, Yeah. I mean, I'm interested to see it. And if it, for some reason, they have to move people around, I like some of the other options Florida has at shortstop. They've got a JUCO transfer named Landon Russell, who I like. It had some physicality to him, had some twitchiness to him. So he's a guy that could certainly do it. But with Shelton at shortstop, you're able to move Dale Thomas more to third base, and he's definitely more of a third baseman than a shortstop. So I think that's the kind of their optimal alignment there. And maybe someone else ends up beating out Dale Thomas at third, right? So.
Mm-hmm. He's had a good fall. I mean, Sully was saying not only offensively, but he's been really good, with the glove over there. So he looks like it's his job at third, to lose heading into the season.
I too, how could you not be impressed by Jack Caglione? You brought him up first, or else I was going to do this joke where I was going to be like, I saw this kid who I think has a real future. I hope I pronounced his name correctly. Yeah. Hit a home run, 117 miles an hour off the bat, 470 feet, 470. I mean, just insane stuff.
He's a Marvel's character.
Yeah. And from the mound, I did not see him on the mound, but they've tinkered with his arm slot a little bit. Apparently the strikes have been more consistent this fall. Now, early in the fall, I had heard when they first started tinkering with his arm, the strike throwing was not going great. And now it feels like they found a good slot, a good repeatability. And so the strikes are coming a little more. So look, we'll have to see. There's a difference in doing it now and then doing it when the lights come on. Certainly once you get into SEC play, but all kind of sounds positive there. A couple of, I didn't see. So one guy I'm interested in for Florida is Ty Evans, because of how well he played in Omaha last year. He's out this fall after having hip surgery. Nothing crazy or major. It was kind of just like a cleanup situation, but so didn't get him. But I think he's going to be a part of things once we get into the season.
And that just extends that lineup one more guy, right? And it's going to be a good lineup.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, they've got some extra pieces here. I mean, like, what do you do with a guy like Tyler Shelnut, right? I mean, maybe the answer is a lot of DH, maybe, but it feels like he might end up being an extra piece in some regard. And that's like a really good bench bat to have, or extra piece to have. Outfield-wise, I think we'll also see Brody Donay out in right field. I think he's more of a field option. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a big body. It's physical. Coolsy. I mean, he did catch a little bit when I was there. The catching is a work in progress, to put it kindly.
But he's got a really great arm. I mean,
he has an excellent arm. I mean,
the other parts, as you said, is need some work. But boy, I mean, and you can stick him in right field. I don't know how good a fielder he is, but you're not going to take an extra base on that cat. I mean,
and that seems like a little more of where he's destined is right field. The arm, like you said, the arm really plays in right field. He's a good enough athlete. He reminds me in that specific way of Kyle Teal from Virginia, where they didn't catch him early in his career because they had Logan Michaels, who was a veteran, and they threw him out in right field, and because the arm plays and he was athletic. I think also like Kyle Teal, Brody Donay. Maybe the route running might be a little rough. It's not the most intuitive.
He's not a natural outfielder.
He's not a right fielder. Yeah. He also does, because he's such a big frame. He's, what do they have him listed on the roster here? 6'6", 215. He actually looks kind of weird in the catcher's gear because he's you're not used to seeing someone that tall in that catcher's gear.
Yeah. And in Jacksonville, we had a shorter umpire, and it was not a good combination because Donay is 6'6" or so, and the umpire was not, and
the umpire had to stand up straight to see over.
He needed a stool.
Yeah, needed to just stand out behind the pitcher and call strikes from there.
Yeah.
So he apparently had not had a great fall in terms of production in the scrimmages, but he had a couple of real hard hit balls in the game I was there, the first game of the Fall World Series. So perhaps trending up for Donay, and the best version of the Gators lineup is going to involve him being a big part of it.
And Sully made a comment that, I mean, he has as much power as Kaggs does. It's raw power, right? He's certainly not as polished, but even if you're, if you're going to get compared to Kaggs in anything, I mean, he's the best player in college baseball. That's a feather in your cap heading into the season.
They showed Jalen Guy in center field, transfer from Liberty. He can really go and get it in center field. Yep. He puts together a good at bat. I'm not sure he's going to hit much. He didn't hit much at Liberty until last year. Like, it took him 4 years to hit at Liberty. So I'm not all that confident he's going to hit it. It's just kind of a matter of how willing are you to put up with that if the defense is excellent. Like, if you bat him ninth, like, that sounds fine.
Right.
But does it start to apply pressure at some point if you have other guys who are also struggling?
Right. And, and you've got Robertson, who had a really, when I saw him, Sully said he'd had a really good fall with a bat. And, that was the problem last year. He was a good defender, but certainly a lot of speed, but he just, he didn't get on base enough. And this fall, he was a really good offensive player and has a great shot to be the leadoff man. I mean, he's the leader for leadoff man, heading into the spring.
A couple of guys that are back, obviously we won't touch on too much, but Cade Curlin back at second base, kind of know what we're getting there. Although it will be interesting to see what he looks like. He's got another year kind of in the weight room behind him now, another year of understanding, or really his first time of having a full season behind him, understanding what SEC baseball is. And obviously he was excellent last year, even without all that. So I will be interested to see what's next for him. And then Luke Heyman, he probably going to end up doing the lion's share of the catching.
Right.
Good offensive piece. So we'll see there. And Tanner Garrison is going to be, I've kind of heard the idea that, Heyman might catch 2 of the 3 days in the weekend and Garrison catches the other. Garrison, an advanced defensive catcher, not terrible with the bat either. He's got some physicality, but he never really got full-time at-bats at Coastal. So we'll have to see. Again, it's a big jump to face SEC pitching, so we'll have to see what happens there. But the defensive tools are ready to go for Garrison. So, Mound. I didn't see. You raved about Liam Peterson.
Yeah,
I
I sure
didn't
did.
see him, but I saw.
Yeah.
But I saw a bunch of other freshmen. I was kind of pleased. I got to see a lot of freshmen the day I was there, so that's good to get eyes on some of the new guys. Saw a couple of veterans as well. Fisher Jameson seems like a guy who's going to have more to say about the bullpen this year. There was a lot of excitement about him on the Cape. A lot of scouts out to see him on the Cape. And understandably, like, he's got good stuff. He's got some funk, but I think he's going to be a guy who's going to take a step. I saw him 92, 94, good slider.
Yeah.
In the Fall World Series. Go ahead.
Did you see McNeely?
No, I didn't see McNeely.
Freshman.
Yeah.
He's a guy. I think
Yeah.
he's got a chance to be the midweek starter and then work his way into a bigger role. And maybe, maybe next year he's the, weekend guy with Peterson. So they staff really excited about those two in particular. But they've got a lot of freshmen who are coming in throwing strikes, and that's usually the problem for the younger guys. They just they're not commanding, and I think that's why Florida is a team, certainly on the mound, that even though they lost some really good pitchers, I think they're going to be fine, man. They're going to pick up right where they left off, and then offensively, you lose a guy like Wyatt Langford. That's a blow, but they're going to have some star power in that lineup. I think the middle of that order, if people play to potential, will be one of the better ones in the conference, and that means one of the better ones in the country.
Yeah, you mentioned it's a good point about the mound, because the guys they have returning, they're going to have some opportunities to let these other guys kind of figure it out. Like, Liam Peterson might get put in the rotation, but I'm pretty confident he's going to be all right. Like, some of these other freshmen who are a little more raw, or whose stuff is not quite there yet, they're going to have opportunities to get their feet wet and not be asked immediately, barring something unforeseen, to go get high leverage outs. But, I think the best arm that I saw on the freshman was Jake Clemente, who's kind of come out of nowhere. He redshirted last year, had a shoulder injury, and shoulder injuries are kind of notoriously dicey. But he's come back, and I saw him at 94 to 96 with his fastball. Somebody else told me he's been 97 to 99 in some of his other outings. It's a low 80s slider. He'll flip in a changeup too, but that's a guy who could close. That's closer stuff there. There's also been talk about Riley Whitmer, another freshman who could maybe be in that closer mix. The stuff isn't quite the same as Clemente, but it's 92, 94 with the fastball, slider, low to mid 80s. And with him, there's also a lot of projectability, not just with like the body, but he's got a really smooth, easy delivery that's repeatable. He's got really good extension. Like, it looks like he's releasing the ball like 20 feet from the plate because his extension is really good. So he's a guy that, whatever his role is this year, he's got like weekend starter written all over him, just because of some of those aspects of his game. So, Grayson Smith was an interesting guy. He's kind of projectable as well, but it was 89, 91 with the fastball, but really good feel for a breaking ball that was kind of slurvy, 78 to 81 mostly. Spoiler alert, Florida is going to have an embarrassment of riches on the mound.
And one guy,
to say about it.
One guy I kept waiting on you to mention, and you didn't, is Robert Satin, freshman lefty.
I didn't see him in my
kind of a tough at bat. Watching him, he's kind of a funky delivery lefty, but he's got real stuff. So there's a role for a guy like that. That's a tough look lefty. So
yeah, that I had heard about him earlier this fall, and it was mentioned to me that he's got like, situational lefty right away written all over him, like at a bare minimum.
Yeah. He's going to be a piece, right?
Yeah. Yeah. He'll have a role to play. So for sure. So again, spoiler alert, Florida's going to have some arms. I don't know if that is not new or novel, but it'll be interesting to see how they kind of fit all the pieces around. They've got a really good core that we know what to expect from on the mound, but it'll be interesting to see how they fill in around them. So Mark, tell us a little bit about the defending national champions. You were there on Sunday. They took on the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns, and sounded like they, to the extent that results matter in the fall, it seemed like they kind of mopped the floor with them.
Yeah. It was pitching, man. They just threw so many strikes, high velocity strikes. it was, Gage Jump started. He's the UCLA transfer who really didn't pitch much there. He was injured with Tommy John, and so he's coming in and he's been better than advertised. They knew he was good, but he's been, he's exceeded expectations. So he went 2 innings, was really good. Then Thatcher Hurd came in and he looked as good as he looked better than I've ever seen him. He was really sharp. He was up to 97, I believe, and obviously the breaking stuff was working. He was just perfect. He worked, pitched 2 innings, 6 up, 6 down, really really easy. Luke Holman, the Alabama transfer, came in, and he was just a strike machine. In his first inning, he threw 16 pitches, 15 strikes, just totally filling up the zone. The second inning, pitched around an error, or else he would have had 6 up, 6 down. He had 7 up, 6 down with an error. I mean, you see the trend here. So then the freshman Cam Johnson came in, and as good as the other 3 were, and they were really good, he had the best day of any of them. I mean, he's a 6'5", 240-pound lefty who he hit 97. He's been up higher. And it was 92 to 97. He had breaking balls. He threw strikes. I mean, it was what you're looking for. How this kid ever made it to campus is a great question. I mean, he was fun to watch. So, I mean, Justin Lohr finished. They pitched. It was 10 innings. They had 5 guys through 10, or through 2 innings each in that first game. And he was fine, but after watching those 4, I mean, there was a drop off. So I think the question is going to be, what do you do with a guy like Johnson, right? You already have 3 quality weekend guys who you feel great about. You can take your time with him, but he looks really advanced right now. I don't know if maybe you close him, right? I mean, he's such an uncomfortable at bat. Or you just throw him in there like we're talking about with Liam Peterson at Florida, and he's just so good. He's too good to not start in SEC play. So, and then the next game, Ackenhausen was good. He started it, and then they rolled through a few more. Aiden Moffett was a guy who really didn't pitch much last year. If I remember right, he maybe threw 1 game or 2 games, something like that. And he was up to 98, and just he's probably their biggest, made the biggest jump, biggest improvement from last year to this year on the mound. Offensively, Tommy White's been out all fall, so it's there's your power source. Hayden Travinski was there. He drove in some runs in the opener, but there's not just especially with White out, there's not that group of power guys. There are guys who are going to hit home runs, but there's not that huge, lineup that just scares you from a home run standpoint, without White there. However, a lot of athletic guys, a lot of tough at bats. They were aggressive on the bases. They had 2 suicide squeezes that worked. One was a hit, and the other was an out at first, but run scored both times. I mean, that's just a different way for LSU to play, and I think they have the pieces where they'll be able to do that, which is that's going to be kind of exciting for LSU fans who are used to just sitting back and waiting on the 3-run homer. They're still going to have some of that, but they don't have to, and I think that's going to make this year, especially with them pitching the way that they look like they're going to, kind of make them, a factor in this race once again. So I came away, obviously really impressed, especially once Tommy White's in the middle of that order and everybody else kind of, they're going to get better pitches because nobody wants to deal with him. So I do think that LSU has everything they need, right, to go back, even though they're going to have the bullseye and they're going to get everybody's best shot. They kind of had that last year, and it turned out okay.
Yeah, we have to see them do it, right? But having a different roster makeup this year, if they're able to, I'm not saying win a national title again because that's just
there's a lot of luck to get to
asking for repeats is a difficult thing. But
Yeah.
if they're in that mix again, if they get challenged to get to Omaha, if they get to Omaha, whatever it is, that's really impressive because there's a lot of programs that if they have their type of team and they have a roster that kind of fits that way that team typically wins games, things go well. And when they don't, they don't, right? So the idea that LSU could go from 1 year winning a national title with a team where we're like debating at the end of the year how many usable arms they have, right? To potentially next year being in the opposite situation where you might start to wonder where runs are going to come from, right? Now, it's a sliding scale, right? I mean, there are teams that are going to have far bigger problems offensively than LSU, but coming off of last year, it's probably going to look a lot different as you suggest. So I'm struck on the mound by the idea relatedly that, last year we were kind of wondering how many usable arms LSU had at the end of the year. And we were talking about guys like, hey, maybe if Javen Coleman can, he's on the mend, maybe they can stretch him a little bit and they can start him in the postseason, or hey, maybe you circle back on Christian Little. And it strikes me that those guys are still there. And I think it might benefit them and the team that like, hey, whatever we kind of get from them, I don't want to say it's just gravy, but
the pressure's
it's
off.
not as right. Especially with a guy like Christian Little, who so highly touted going to Vanderbilt, everybody, there was an expectation of what he was going to be, especially because because he came into that program on the heels of Rocker and Leiter. That there was an expectation of what he was going to be at Vanderbilt. Didn't happen. Stuff happens, right? He goes to LSU, and last year was kind of like, okay, now he's getting it straightened out. Gonna figure it out. Fresh lease on life, working with Wes Johnson, where, and it was uneven, right? He had some good stuff, but he had mostly inconsistent results. And then by the time the business end of the season rolled around, he was not really involved.
Yeah, they couldn't trust him. Right.
Maybe this year, pressure kind of totally off. And look, it's a good enough arm. Like pro baseball will be waiting on him. Like Christian Little is going to have an opportunity to play pro baseball. So that pressure, I feel like, is already kind of gone.
And
because
he did throw in the second game Sunday and looked good. He threw, two quality innings. So, and looked like a guy who was, in the mix to really help him. Did not see Coleman, did not see Cade Woods. Those are two guys I would expect will throw. Another guy did not see is DJ Primo, which is an awesome name. And he redshirted last year, but Jay couldn't say enough, things about another guy who's made a jump, right? He's going to be in the mix somewhere, especially, as a left-handed reliever.
Yeah, it's just amazing the number of guys you mentioned there that are just like extra parts, that are just going to be nice to haves. Whereas last year, Nate Ackenhausen had to save their bacon in the postseason with the best start of his season. And it's like something has gone, no disrespect, but something has gone really sideways if they are like turning to Nate Ackenhausen next year in the business end of the season is like, go save our season.
Right.
And now we know he could do it, but like there's enough depth there that like there's a hope that it doesn't come to that where they're having to like just look around for the healthy arms. So,
and offensively, I do think that the key to the team is going to be those guys who were freshmen last year. How did they make the jump? The Paxton Klings, the Jared Jones, Brady Neal, those guys. And then that's you see that with guys who had maybe minor roles as freshmen who are now move into that. They get promoted basically, and they're in this spot where, okay, it's up to me now. I've got to embrace this opportunity. And I do think that's, that's going to be a real key for them, being able to handle, this new role. And the other guy I'd point out, Jake Brown, oh man, he looked great as freshman. He played first base. He played right field. He looks like the next batting star, in that long lineage of LSU stars that just come in and play right away and play the entire time there and then move on to to pro ball, he's the next one. He sure looked the part. He just stays on base, really athletic looking kid. Will have some pop, but at this point in his career, he's more hitterish, right? And I think that's going to play well. And if you're hitting LSU pitching, in inter squads, you're probably going to be okay when you get to SEC play.
Good point about the sophomores. I'll just quickly say, I think it was easy to look at that group of freshmen last year and kind of be like, about what they produced. But consider the following. Jared Jones hit 304 with 14 home runs. And yes, he swung and missed a lot. And so by the end of the year, he wasn't as much in the mix, but that's a pretty doggone good year for a lot of players. Paxton Kling hit 289 with a 390 on base. And Brady Neal we probably don't get the breakout of Hayden Travinski if Brady Neal stays healthy all year. Now, maybe Neal would not have hit enough to where eventually they would have gone that route, but they went to Neal first, and it was his injury that took him out of the lineup, not lack of production. So I think you're exactly right that that's the key to the whole thing. And another impressive trick turned by this, trick pulled by this coaching staff.
Whoop, whoop.
Yoicks. Yeah. Yikes. Sorry, fellas. A trick pulled by this coaching staff. And I don't want to say trick because it makes it seem like it's deceptive, but it's just like, it is hard to get talented freshmen to come in and play part-time as freshmen and then not go elsewhere. Especially when this is LSU, right? They're recruiting a whole new batch of guys who are here to take your job.
Yep.
And that's hard to do. And they've kind of created a system there where players just kind of expect when they come in as freshmen that I might sit. And furthermore, they seem to be kind of okay with that. So impressive stuff all around. I'm excited to see what LSU looks like again in the spring, as we all are. Well, maybe not so much fans of other SEC clubs, but neutral observers are excited to see what LSU looks like. Mark, one other thing before we go here, our friend and colleague. Well, I don't want to speak for you. He's my friend. I don't know how you feel about him.
Oh, I hate that guy.
Colleague. Yeah, our colleague Aaron Fitt saw South Carolina at their Fall World Series this past week. And so he was kind enough to kind of send along some of his notes. And you and I have touched on some of this stuff with South Carolina. So I don't think it's going to be anything that totally comes out of nowhere. But he mentions the offense and I being kind of what is going to butter the bread there for South Carolina. I think he's right. He mentioned specifically that Mark Kingston likes the 2022 Texas A&M model of offense, which you'll recall was like lots of walks, lots of fouling off pitches, just like gritty at bats. And then when a pitcher makes a mistake, you hammer it. Right. And
it's so frustrating to face that.
Yes. And it can be frustrating to watch, frankly.
Yeah.
It moves a little slow, but it's effective. And so Aaron mentioned that he thinks they have the lineup to do it. And I'm kind of with him when you think about, Ethan Petrie's back, Cole Messina, Gavin Casas. They brought in Parker Noland, who I know there's some differing opinions on him just because he's another guy at Vanderbilt that it never quite totally clicked for him, but there's no arguing that he's a veteran guy who's had a ton of SEC at bats. Carson Hornung is a guy who's been in the South Carolina program who Aaron sees as a potential breakout guy. So, and I'm with him generally. They've also got a couple of guys he didn't mention that I think are a little more athletic than what they've had in the lineup. So I'm not saying that they're necessarily, especially talking about the A&M style of offense, they're not going to go out there and start stealing a bunch of bases, but I do think they have some athleticism that they may not have necessarily had in past years, but we'll see about that. He mentioned shortstop as being a key position. The guy to watch there is Will Tippett. You may remember Will Tippett kind of got into the lineup last year because of injuries. And so he was kind of overmatched, frankly, especially at the plate last year because he just wasn't expected to be in that kind of role, but supposedly he's a little more physical. He's put on a little bit of weight. He looks more mature. He looks like he's really ready to compete a little more at the plate. And then he's always been a really good athlete and he can really run. So, if he can handle shortstop and be a guy for them who's handles the position defensively, number one, but then number two can at least be competitive at the plate in a way that he wasn't always last year. I think that's big. And the biggest question there is the pitching staff for South Carolina. They've got some nice pieces. Matthew Becker is back.
Yeah.
And, he's a guy who would be a nice like Saturday or Sunday guy in the SEC, but it's entirely likely he's the Friday guy. Yeah. And they've got Eli Jones kind of fits into that same bucket, right? There's some optimism about Roman Kimball coming back. Remember the Notre Dame transfer who was supposed to be at South Carolina last year, missed the year with injury. But anytime you have a pitcher coming back from a total, a completely missed year, you just never know exactly what you're going to get there. So just, a lot of question marks there. South Carolina on the mound. It feels like Aaron says he feels like they have good depth, but it's just, who are your dudes? And you and I have talked about this we talked about this last year until we were blue in the face, just that depth is great. You got to have depth, but in the SEC, you also really have to have dudes. Like you can't go into weekends with 3 guys who probably should be Saturday guys and expect to win series. Like you really need a guy who can compete on Friday. So maybe South Carolina will have that guy. Don't forget they did turn over the pitching coach position, Justin Parker, now at Mississippi State. So that's a variable there, but maybe there is somebody there that could be that Friday guy. That's kind of stuff happens all the time in college baseball. So we certainly can't write it off, but they're not in a position that Vanderbilt is in with Carter Holton coming back. Right. Or, even, there's teams like Kentucky that feel really good about Travis Smith, who has Friday stuff. And we just need to figure out if he's actually the right Friday guy. South Carolina doesn't have an established Friday guy. And also it remains to be seen if they have a guy with Friday stuff. Right. So it's a question on 2 fronts. So we'll see. That's the biggest question mark there, but it sounds like they're going to hit, and that's going to keep you in a lot of ball games.
Yeah. Well, Friday guys are hard to find, right? Certainly SEC Friday guys, if you're lucky to have one, and some teams have more than one, and that's what makes them successful. Look at Florida last year. Look at what LSU looks like they're going to have this year. Those are the teams that they're going to be able to sustain that consistency. If you don't have that, you've got to win other ways, whether it's, clutch hitting or power or, putting pressure on defenses or something. But so that's going to be an interesting thing to watch with South Carolina, because maybe somebody emerges. As you often remind me that Butch Thompson told you, players do get better, so, that's always a possibility.
Yeah, and certainly it sounds like the offense will keep their floor pretty high. We'll have to, with the East is I think there's some opportunity to be had in the East. We know Missouri and Georgia are rebuilding
in transition.
Truly rebuilding those rosters. I don't know what to expect there at all from really either of those 2 teams. So there is an opportunity for, look, if you finish 4th or 5th, if they're battling with Kentucky for kind of like 4th or 5th in the East, that puts you at least kind of in the postseason discussion. Now I know South Carolina has much bigger ambitions than that, but considering some of the turnover there, I'm not so sure that's not a more realistic expectation. Yeah. Look, they're my closest SEC club to where I live. I'd love for them to be a box office attraction, for me to make a lot of trips to Columbia during the 2024 season. So, but it does kind of seem like in this SEC, with just as tough as it is top to bottom, we repeat this so much, but it's just true that you got to really be, you got to almost be national title good in the SEC. This SEC, you almost have to be national title good to finish kind of in the top half of the league at this point, right? When you consider that you got 7 teams hosting regionals, well, by definition, every team hosting a regional is a legitimate Omaha contender, right? So that right there tells you exactly what it is, that if you're an Omaha type team, you finished top half in the league. Anybody below that, we're not necessarily talking about a team that we're pegging to Omaha. So anyway, that's questions to be answered in the 2024 season, which is both further away than I would like and also barreling towards us at a breakneck speed as we sit here roughly a week from Thanksgiving. So
we'll be churning out preview content, in the next few weeks, seems like. So
truly, when you talk about how much time we're just going to spend like away from it for like holiday reasons and what have you, like it's really, truly just 2 months from now, we'll be doing preview content, and that's really not that far away. Then you factor in the holidays and it comes even closer, even faster. So Again, looking forward to it. Also, that's kind of scary because there's a lot of work to be done between here and now, but very excited, obviously, about the 2024 season based on what you and I saw this fall. No reason to believe it won't be another just incredible season across the SEC. That is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. One programming note, next week, as we record this, next week is Thanksgiving week. Mark is going to find out about this as I say it, because I forgot to tell him about this. The plan is I will record not a solo episode. I will have a guest or two, perhaps. We're going to put an episode in the can, basically. We're going to pre-record an episode to go out Thanksgiving week. I will be, as most of us are, doing the family thing over Thanksgiving. So Mark and I will not be recording a fresh podcast that week, but I will have a podcast up for Thanksgiving week. So as you travel to grandma's or whoever's, you will have a little something to listen to from the folks here at Highway to Hoover. Hope you enjoy that episode. So we will have something for you, but it will just be me and guests and not Mark. I'm sorry. I know Mark has the better voice of the two of us. He's a lot smarter than me. You're just going to have to deal with for 1 week. I promise we'll be back in our normal form after that, but we're doing a week without Mark. So anyway, that's going to do it for this episode.
Everybody needs time off, man.
That's fair. No, totally fair. Totally fair. And Mark's got responsibility. Like Mark has a day job and children, and he's got all these responsibilities, and I'm just, just hanging out here, it's just me. So, thank you to PitchLogic for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. Go to pitchlogic.com for more information. Thank you, Mark, as always. And then thank you, the listener, for listening.